Hey everyone, today's video I'm just going to be talking about drawing with ink. I feel like I get asked a lot on streams and on videos, and I also see like a lot of people very interested in sort of how to draw directly with ink and without like a pre-sketch or a pencil. And there's a lot of different sort of inks that I've used throughout the years, and mostly I draw, well, everything I've drawn for like the last 4 years has all been from imagination. So I guess it's a little imagination and ink, but some of the different types that are pretty much the same idea of drawing with basically something permanent or that is very striking, I guess, on the page that it's a little hard to cover up. So ink is commonly sort of that idea, and usually I'll draw with sometimes a fine liner. I know that a lot of people like drawing with fine liner pens, and brush pens are pretty popular too. And I often like drawing with a markers as well. And I use a lot of Sumi ink, and that's kind of the main way that I draw with ink now, just because it's very cheap. I can get ink washes, and yeah, I just like how it is, and I like using a traditional brush. And everyone asks what kind of brush this is, and it's a cheap like $1 bamboo brush that you could probably get at any local art store. So nothing special, and I guess that kind of brings to the point. Like, do different art tools actually matter, or do they really change anything? And there's sort of, I think, yes and no, but I think the things that are different, like I guess a better pen versus a cheap pen. Sometimes like you can get more reliable pens or brushes, so I guess that sort of is like a perk to it, but I don't think it's like everything. And I've used very cheap brushes, and I like the cheap brushes more. And anytime I've gone from like a brush pen to I have a fountain brush over here, or I go to a marker, or pretty much any different type of brush, they after about like week or so, they all start to feel the same. And whatever you use for a tool, you'll just like slowly adapt to it and just get used to it after you kind of get some repetition, muscle memory, and familiarity with it. So really, I don't think there's like as a whole, there's not much differences at all. You will kind of just get into a process that is familiar to whatever you were using before. Same with, I think that kind of leads nicely into like, I think pencil is probably the most common way that people draw with. And if you're looking to sort of, I guess, transfer from pencil into pens or something more permanent, I think the main thing that a lot of people sort of see with doing that is that when you draw with a pen, it's much more upfront, and everything that you do is a lot more noticeable. I wouldn't say it's like, I don't like, after drawing with ink for around 5 years, I really don't think that it's as magical as it, it looks. At least I used to think that it was magical when someone would draw with ink, but really it's not as insane as I would have thought it to be after like being pretty familiar over the years with it. You sort of get so used to it, kind of like anything else. Like you will just get used to it, and it becomes sort of like a normal thing. But I did like ink when I was first practicing as sort of a way to, like, initially when starting to draw from ink, from something like maybe you do a lot of digital or pencil where you can erase. I kind of find that ink is sort of a pencil without an eraser. So using a pencil without an eraser is pretty close to it, as what you do, you sort of have to keep in the end product. But there are a lot of ways to correct your mistakes. So there are ways to do it where you sort of leave yourself with no way out and you have to deal with it. And then there's ways where you could use a permanent ink and just sort of keep doing layers of washes. You could do coloring over it with marker. You could do a lot of things. You could use water-based ink, and then when you add water to it, it will wash away a lot of your lines. You can ink very dark black shadows over all of your mistakes. Like there are still a lot of ways to sort of hide your mistakes or mask it and morph and change it. So that's kind of one of the reasons that I haven't gone back to drawing with pencil. And I feel like nowadays pencil would probably be pretty hard for me actually to sort of get anything that looks decent or something that I'd be happy with, just because I'm so used to just drawing with only ink now. So yeah, once you get used to it, it is really no different than any other way of drawing. And I've whenever I go to draw digitally, I sort of just draw the same way as I do traditionally. And I'll just often use like a basic ink brush on or ink pen tool, whatever, just makes like a line. And then I'll just go over and color the same way that I would with a marker. So yeah, there's really not too many differences, but for some like things that I guess I've learned over time to sort of make the ink look better, I guess, or more of kind of my own taste. But one of the things that can kind of help, because a lot of people are probably wondering, like actual useful tips, and because I know it's not the exact same, it's sort of like just a different medium, really. But one thing is to kind of keep lines a little bit spacey is usually what I find to look best for ink, and it kind of makes it look a lot cleaner. And a lot of the space that I leave open, like using this Crayola marker to draw this character here, a lot of the space I leave open is kind of leaving myself with open air or space to be able to add other things on top. And for me, that's really where ink sort of shines. Is, well, for one, you don't have to sketch out anything ahead of time, so that's sort of all already happening at the same time that you're drawing whatever, a character or a scene or landscape, flowers, whatever object you're drawing. So everything is sort of happening all at once. And I guess that's kind of the big thing to really get used to, is that there's not much time to really think about the character as much as if you're sketching, you have a lot of time to sort of like keep doing iterations. You can correct as you go. You can stop and sort of like, if you don't like something, you can totally erase it. And what I found to sort of almost emulate that aspect of you can do it another way or like erase it and do another thing is I'll just often just do a character, and if I don't like this character, then I will just continue down the scene and I will just draw the same character down here, and it will sort of be another iteration of that character. And this is kind of how I go about practicing and sort of like adding some repetition into my drawings to just learn a little bit better. But so let's say I drew this character and I completely hated him and I wanted to erase him, but oops, I did it with permanent ink, so I can't do that. So I'll, instead of going and erasing, since I can't do that with ink, I'll just go and draw another character. So there's always like more paper, I guess you could go and draw on. And if you are even drawing digitally, you can just basically, if you really want it to be hardcore, you could turn off the undo button. But I don't usually do that. But I'll just try like mentally not to use it as much when I'm doing digital stuff, even though it is there. So you can still basically practice the same thing on digital. So maybe that might work better if you don't want to use a lot of paper. But I mean, in general, drawing is going to use paper anyways. So I don't think it's too big of a deal. But yeah, so I'll just go and draw the same character or a different iteration and kind of just like correct a lot of things that I maybe didn't like or wanted to expand on. So that's one way to kind of get past that sort of lack of being able to get a second chance, I guess, since it's kind of like a sort of a one-shot medium. But there's still a lot of ways to sort of cheat in a way or work around that aspect. So I'll just kind of continue his character. But yeah, leaving a lot of this loose area, I like to go through and shade with tones. And lately I've been doing a lot of going through and I'll draw it all out with ink and place a lot of the blacks down. I haven't really done any blacks on this character besides like the eyebrows. But yeah, so I'll go through, I'll draw the blacks, and then I like the original drawing with the line art looks pretty similar, like it has that same structure. But then going over with the shadows, I have a lot of opportunities to basically make it more three-dimensional and to change things along the way. So with ink wash, that's a way that I kind of have to change it and morph it a bit with shadows. And then after the ink wash, then I'll go through and color. And then coloring, now recently I've been also adding tone throughout the character, once again with the markers to just make it blend a bit better and render a little bit further. So yeah, there's a lot of options even after the initial character. So you're definitely just not stranded or stuck after you don't like a certain aspect. And yeah, really the just going like to the next character really solves a lot of that kind of problems that I was having transitioning, and still now like that kind of difference that the two mediums have, and sort of like trying to add the good from one to the other. And yeah, so I'd finish the character, but I don't want to like take too much time by finishing the whole character and then go into swap to another one. But yeah, so then leaving some of the areas. I probably won't finish the whole one since it's already been 13 minutes on the video. But yeah, I'll just kind of get a little bit of it in here so I have somewhat to show. And let's say I didn't like how his shirt was, or I wanted to add armor on him, and now this is kind of my chance to do that. And now I could add armor on his shoulders here. And sort of how I've placed this character too is leaving a little bit of open room to be able to create a scene off this. So similar to how some of my other drawings, I'm doing the exact same thing. I was starting a character and then leaving a lot of open options, which I think is kind of like a main key thing for when I draw from imagination and with ink, is really leaving myself with a lot of room to adapt from and leaving a lot of options open. Well, sometimes closing a lot of options can also be a lot easier on the brain. So yeah, we got this, and I'll just do some kind of like scarf maybe to finish out that top half. And if I usually don't try to judge the drawing at this point. And I guess if you just want to do line art only, then you can kind of like get a lot of practice in. Since it's a lot of constant drawing, you can just keep going from character to character, and basically I would fill the whole page with sort of my starting character, and then usually I'll keep with like the similar theme and characters and just kind of like fill the whole page with different iterations and sort of just explore really. And I'll leave a lot of areas open and basically just room to make the ink very flexible as I can. And that's kind of how I go about drawing with the ink. And you might notice like I do a lot of little marks as I go as well. And these are kind of to basically shape out or render as I go, and sets up for like the markers and the ink tone. And a lot of this like open space. Well, I'll see if I can find something. But yeah, a lot of the open space will be pretty handy when I go to color. And I didn't add a highlight, but I will on this cheek. So it leaves room for highlights as more of like, you could go more of like a very hatchin, and that also works, but this is just kind of why I leave some of the areas open. And then when I go to color too, it sort of like the hatching that I did earlier helps describe those areas a bit better. And then this is kind of a perk to do in ink as well, especially straight ink. I don't have to sketch anything out. And now we're already at the coloring phase, if you decide to add color to your drawings. And I can do this like pretty quickly. So I guess speed is a good perk, as I'm not really like spending too much time thinking about if one way would be better than the other. It's kind of just a very fast go for it, see what happens. Whatever worked or didn't work, then I'll decide to basically carry that into the next character. So it's a very fast way to draw as well, if you don't want to like spend as much time sketching it out ahead of time. And then you can get into basically shading, and especially if that's something that you enjoy more when drawing. If you're not super into like sketching out ahead of time and you really just want to focus on like shading and like coloring or anything like that, then that's definitely a little bit of a way to sort of get to those steps that you might enjoy more. And then I don't want to use my water brush, even though that would be an easy way to do this. I'll see if I can find a gray quick. Right. Yeah, so I left these areas kind of open, since I know that when I go in with a tone, I can then use those areas for my shadows. And then I can kind of like render a little bit further with a little bit of hatching with the marker as well. So I kind of like look at coloring as a way to draw basically another layer on top. So kind of how you would sketch ahead of time with a pencil and then ink over top. That is basically what I'm doing with the marker. So this would be like kind of like inking, I guess, where you would make some minor adjustments and change things as you go. But I can really shape out these forms just with a tone and really sort of like correct or change some things that might be a little more pleasing or interesting. So yeah, I don't think there's much more to like talk about other than that. It's kind of mostly a lot of the tips, I guess. So that was kind of more of like with the marker, it's kind of more of a fine liner, so everything that I did with this, I'd basically do the same thing with the fine liner. There's one thing to kind of be mindful, I guess, if you're gonna do alcohol markers or water tones over top, is kind of like see if your ink is permanent, if it's alcohol based, water based, and that sort of thing. Yeah, just try it out and see if your ink works with alcohol markers. You'll know if it starts smearing a lot, and if it drags the marker, or if it starts to smear your ink or not. And so this one I have is a water-based brush pen, and so if I was to do, I can do markers over it. I usually stick with a lot of water-based inks, since it's very easy to, like, I'll reliably know that I can do alcohol markers over it. Whereas some permanent inks, I've ran into the problem that the markers like to drag and they take a while to dry, but a lot of water-based seem to dry pretty quickly. And the other ink, I usually use Sumi ink, since it's like this this kind is semi-permanent and becomes permanent after like a couple days of drying, but it dries really fast. And then I know as soon as I draw the characters, I can go immediately to color it right away, and I don't have to worry about the alcohol smudging. And then I can also, with the Sumi ink, go over with ink washes as well. So for me, it kind of is the best of both worlds. So, but that's kind of you'll probably have to experiment and see sort of how your inks and pens react. But yeah, I think that's probably gonna do it for this video. I don't want to make it too long, and I think that kind of explains hopefully like everything that I kind of know or might help you guys out. So yeah, it's drawing with ink.